So good morning, and thank you guys for being here. I know it's the last week. I know the weather's coming. So I know that you're here by design or on purpose, so I appreciate that. I'd like to open with a quote by Reverend Dr. Rita Brock. She says, "Love is most fully incarnate when human beings are present in many dimensions of themselves, spiritually, physically, emotionally, aesthetically, and intellectually present. Physical love is an important dimension of eros and a life-sustaining power that finds expression in many relationships. The love of flesh includes birth, care for the dying, nourishment of children, and tender affection, as well as sexual intimacy. The more present that human beings can be to each other as their fullest selves, that they can be, the more complete the love." I'm not very good at titling messages. Love Incarnate, the embodiment of sexuality and spirituality. It's about who we are and how we are and why we are what we are. The Word became flesh and came to live among us. Jesus moved in next door. The invisible became tangible. The infinite became finite. The transcendent became immanent. And that which was beyond all comprehension, now self-evident. To think that Jesus might laugh or cry, sweat or bleed, or experience sorrow or joy like you and I seems incomprehensible. But the incarnation invites us to experience this embodiment of the grace of God and God's Spirit. By design, the embodiment is this fusion of our spirituality, our soul, with our sexuality, our body. But religion has this long history of pitting flesh over and against the spirit. Dr. De La Torre writes in a recent article, "By linking shame and sex to the Christian doctrine of the fall, Augustine argued that aroused sexual organs signify a human will toward the flesh over and against the spirit." That's a problem. You see, when we allow our sexuality to be diminished and reduced to just a physical act, we're negating the fullness that God intended. By definition, sexuality is recognizing the expressions of and the influences on the relationships of embodied persons. To be clear, our sexuality is a wide range of attitudes and behaviors. We could say that a theology of sexuality talks about God in an intimate, in a physical, and an embodied manner. Sexuality is about life. It's about being alive. It's about being creative and intellectual, emotional and spiritual. Sexuality is the movement of the Spirit, the divine within us, inspiring us to act beyond ourselves. And by nature, when we do act, our body and soul now co-create. You'll like that word, right? Imagine sexuality on this continuum, this giant arc, with this wide range of beliefs and behaviors. And imagine intimacy in all its forms along that continuum. So as we move across it, we find a desire to connect with one another intimately. That's social intimacy. And it constitutes every relationship we have. Friends, neighbors, families, partner, students. Everyone who makes up our social network will come in contact and experience social intimacy, if we choose. I think that as humans, we have this deep yearning to know and to be known by others and by our Creator. If we move a little further on the continuum, we find this desire to connect on more sensual levels. And it's not sex. It's called physical intimacy or touch. And physical intimacy finds expression in many different forms and in many different relationships. Touch was meant to be shared. In fact, they say physical touch is good for our immune system. What better way to embody the grace of God than by touch? So how do we do this? How do we live and move and have our being? Well, we can start by looking at sexuality from a different lens. Jesus said, I appointed you to bear fruit, fruit that will last. He commanded us to be fruitful. We know what multiply means, right? But to be creative and energetic, to be constructive and valuable and worthwhile. Jesus commanded us to be fruitful so that we could love each other. So if we're the opposite of these things, we're fruitless. And if we're fruitless, we can be a detriment. Now, I don't know about you, but the last thing I wanted to be called when I was a child was a fruit. It's not a desirable label. It's interesting how this and many other terms over years, over centuries, are taken and turned around to oppress people, because God intended for us to be fruitful. We're a bunch of fruits. We bear fruit, we receive fruit. But ideally, this social and physical intimacy that I'm talking about would fulfill our needs and at the same time inspire us to move beyond ourselves, to be compassionate towards others. Now, if you progress a little further along the spectrum, in terms of sex, physical intimacy views the body with passion. Right? Okay, hope so. But, so think about it, it may also view the body politic with passion as well. It's possible that intimacy in all forms creates passion for justice, because it's social justice issues that are rooted in material and body issues. After I begun this message some time ago, I found this article by Dr. De La Torre that he recently wrote. And in it, another quote, which was so fitting. He says, "What we do with our flesh in the privacy of our own bedroom with our beloved is a virtue, because it's a means of learning how to selflessly love our beloved. And that is the model for extending unselfish compassion to others." Imagine what it feels like to be held by someone you love. Your child, maybe a parent, your lover, a sibling, maybe a dear friend. Imagine the warmth of the touch of your skin. Imagine the tenderness of the two hearts connecting. And imagine the energy that's created in this one-to-one moment. Imagine how that feels. Selfless, compassionate, intimate, inspiring. When I watched the birth of my daughter, I was confused. That's a good point. I was. She was adopted, and there was lots of moms in the room. But I was infused with emotion. And I was grateful that I had the privilege to be there to watch her being born. But how does an infant who's relied on one vessel for nourishment and for life and sustainability, ever bond with another? I wondered. The next morning, my mother laid this 4-pound, precious, naked, screaming little baby on my bare chest. And I heard the Spirit say, "This is how you bond. Flesh on flesh, heart to heart, one with another." Words can't describe the deeply embodied, spiritually intimate, and cosmic connection of oneness in those moments. And Jesus calls us to liberate our bodies. It's a bold statement, but think about it. It's Jesus' touch that healed the lepers, Jesus' touch that healed the bleeding woman. Jesus touched the servant's ear to heal it. And the healing touch of Jesus that raised the dead. So once again, Jesus is the model for us to extend unselfish compassion to one another. It's no wonder that we yearn for touch. God says, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness." God says our bodies and our souls imitate God. So too then does our sexuality and our spirituality. It's our bodies then that become a significant instrument of our faith. Just reflecting back on Rita Brock's quote, she said, "Physical love is an important dimension of Eros, a life-sustaining power. Physical touch, compassion, and love, a life-sustaining power. We need it. And it finds expression in many relationships, not just one." Right? She says that the love of flesh includes birth, care for the dying, the nourishment of children. And she says sexual intimacy too, of course. But she says tender affection. Right? One with another. She says the more present that human beings can be, the fuller we are, the more we experience these things, the more complete our love is with ourselves and with each other. So this is how we bond, right? Flesh on flesh, heart to heart, one with another. When is the last time you reached out and touched someone?